So now I can breathe and talk to you guys in my native language. Take a deep breath. Okay, hello, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. It's so nice to be back. Oh, and there's new faces. This is very exciting.
Yael, I caught the tail end and they really loved you.
Oh, thanks, Badia.
I was at Tel Philo this morning for Rosh Chodesh.
Oh, Chodesh Tov. Okay. Okay. First of all, welcome everybody, and thank you for coming. For those of you that I have never met, my name is Yael, and I will be teaching a course that is really, really dear to all the courses I teach, I end up loving, but this course in particular is really, really dear to my heart, and I want to just give a tiny bit of background, because I think what made me start researching the course years ago, which was not something I had thought about necessarily, very much, as we're going to see, shapes the approach that we're going to be taking in this class. So it must have been about 10 or 12 years ago, I was teaching, there was some sort of conference in New York, and I was teaching at Stern College at the time, so it wasn't an academic conference, it was a conference for, just anyone who wanted to show up, and I gave a class on, I don't even remember anymore what topic it was, and after the class was over, a woman came up to me and she was really emotional and she had tears in her eyes and she said, I have to ask you something. She said, I'm a lawyer. She goes, I don't have a strong background in Jewish studies, but I consider myself to be a religious Jew. She was a lawyer specifically for victims of domestic abuse. And she came over to me and she said, more than once, sorry, I moved this back so I can see you guys. She said more than once she has been in court and the lawyers, the prosecuting lawyer or the lawyers for the defending the husband had been religious men, and they had said remarks to her along the lines of, oh, what are you getting so upset about? Stories like this happened in Tanakh all the time. And she came up to me emotional and she said, I need to ask you, how as a religious Jew, as a person who holds the Tanakh to be our moral compass, as a person who holds the Tanakh to be, the book where we find the basis of our values is in that book. She said, what do you do, Lara? She said, what do you want me to, is this for the Zoom or for the, so that doesn't help? Should I move this also closer? She said, what do you do with that? And I vowed to myself that day, I gave her answers here and there that I did not like, that did not satisfy me, which is the worst feeling ever as an educator. For those of you that have ever given bad answers, that anyone who does it to a kid, you give a bad answer, it kills you, it sticks with you. And I vowed that day to really, to research the topic and to look into what the Tanakh says about women, what the Tanakh says about gender, how it's approached, how we understand the stories in Tanakh, how we understand the overall really approach to what a woman's place is in society. And that's something that I spent a lot of time on, and this course is sort of the result of that. It happens just to be, incidentally, I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and one of the woman that was being interviewed is a woman who fled Iraq and the Islamic Guard, and she's in obviously her life. She's moving from one safe house to the next, and her family there is being jailed, and they're trying to kill her parents or threaten to kill her parents in order for her to, turn herself in. And what she kept going back to in an interview that really struck me was that she said, this is not legal and this is not cultural, because people will say, oh, we can't, she said, people in the West are saying we can't get involved because it's going to lead to Islamophobia. She goes, this has nothing to do with that. She goes, this is men, misogynists, who are using religion as an excuse to do what they want to do. She says, that's plain and simple what it is. And, obviously to a much different degree. Thank God we don't live in a world like that. The questions that we have to ask really stem from that pivotal question. Where is religion in the context of gender? Where does gender fit into religion? And going back to the basics, what does Tanakh say about it and what does it teach us? So when I first started, this interaction with this woman happened, and I think a year or two later, I taught this course in Stern College. And for those of you that know Stern College, so we have girls who are just fresh off the boat from Nicholas and Haredi, Beis Yaakov institutions for a year, and they're very, they're sitting on one side of the room, and then you have the girls who show up in their jeans to show everybody that they could show up to Torah class in their jeans, and you have the whole mix. It's like an amazing, amazing group of students. And I asked on the first day of class, I said, how many of you identify as a feminist? So I'll ask the question here. How many of you identify as a feminist?
Completely or sort of?
How many identify with the feminist movements, let's say? Okay, so I will say what I said to those students. I said,
I never needed a movement to tell me I was a feminist. My mother told me. She cut her hair in the 1920s, and that was it.
So Ellen is. What I said to my students that day is I said, you can put your hands down. It doesn't matter what you call yourselves. You're a bunch of 19 and 20-year-old women sitting in a private university class that your parents are paying over $30,000 a year. And you're in a class of all women being taught by a female professor. I said, whether or not you want to call yourself a feminist, you are benefiting from the feminist movement, plain and simple. Right now, there is, and I'm not getting into modern feminism. There's an amazing book that I have to remember the title, and I will recommend it to everyone in this class when we're done, about how feminism has sort of, in many ways, I don't want to say gone off the rails, but gone to an extreme that is no longer authentic to the original feminist movement and actually doing more harm to women than good. And there is certainly what to be said about that. And I will recommend this book to everyone as soon as I remember the title. But in terms of the notion of equal opportunities for women, I'm not saying women and men are exactly the same, but equal opportunities granted by society. Everyone in this class has to admit that they've benefited from that assumption and the fight for the realization of that assumption. Okay, so we're going to start with that. Now, on the sheets, I don't want to spend too much time reading through all of these. I brought them for you just really to get a sense of the different movements sort of within, and again, this is less relevant to Tanakh, but it's not, because at the end of the day, there's this sort of feedback cycle. Culture is affected by, we are affected by culture, and we affect culture, and there's this feedback loop. And in the Jewish community, we are constantly affected by what's going on the outside, and that affects how we read the text and how we interpret the text, right? There's that feedback loop that's always there. And so on your own time, just read this sort of timeline and get a sense of how things evolved within the sort of political and civil realm. And I think it'll sort of help give a good background in terms of what was going on. Now, what I want to start with is a really, really basic question, which is essentially the question that lawyer asked me that day at the conference. And it's on the second pages of your sources. No, on the right here. Oh, it's the back. Okay, so we gotta save trees, guys. It says, I face a terror. This is a woman named Phyllis Tribble. She's a fantastic scholar. She's written some excellent books. Some of what she writes I agree with, some I don't, but there's no question that she sort of raised the bar in terms of the types of questions that we ask when we're studying Tanakh. And she says as follows, I face a terrible dilemma. Choose ye this day whom you will serve, the God of the fathers or the God of the sisterhood. If the God of the fathers, then the Bible supplies models for your slavery. If the God of sisterhood, then you must reject patriarchal religion and go forth without models to claim your freedom. Okay, what do you make of that? She's sort of asking, what's she asking us essentially to do? She's giving us a choice.
Yeah.
Right? We read a text about a Pilegesh Begiva, and she's raped and killed. She's raped after she's kicked out of the house by her husband, and then a gang of men rape her all night, it says, and then she stumbles back to her house, and her husband first kills her and then dismembers her body. Now, I start with the most extreme example just to make sure you guys come back next week. But what do we do with a story like that, right? So Phyllis Tribble is giving us two options. What's she saying? First option is, huh? Well, but she's saying she's making the claim, and spoiler, we're not going to make this claim in the course, okay? But she's saying believing in God is synonymous with believing in patriarchy, which systematically oppresses women, or rejecting the Bible wholesale, and then you're free, but you're left Bibleless. Right? Those are the two choices she's giving.
She's given an absolute.
Correct. Now, her absolutes derive from the fact that she feels there is no way to take a text like Begeva and make it okay. Right? That's what she honestly, or that's not actually what she feels. That was sort of the argument she puts out. Now, one option, right, is the extreme to reject. There were other sort of middle of the road options, and you'll see that on that timeline I give out. There were reformists. There were women that tried to reform the text itself, to write the story differently. They said the story was, was descriptive, not prescriptive. It was from a different time where certain behaviors and things were okay. We're going to rewrite the story, keeping the lesson, but, toning down the chauvinistic rhetoric, et cetera, et cetera. That was one attempt. And, even within, for example, the reform movement, I was just watching a video someone sent me of a reform girl at her bat mitzvah, and she's invoking not just Elokei Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, but Sarah, Rivka, right? All sorts of changes to liturgy, to the text, all different things that people have tried to sort of make things okay, to be able to hold on to both simultaneously, the idea that women should have equal opportunity, and the idea also that the text is still our basis, okay? I will give a little spoiler alert here. I don't actually think we have to make the choice like that. And what we're gonna discover over this course, which I think is a really, really important course, especially in today's world, is that the Tanakh not only doesn't ask us to make that choice, but that once we really begin to study the stories carefully, and I'm going to talk in a few minutes about what that means to study a story carefully, we're going to begin to understand that it's not an issue of chauvinism or God, right? Or excuse me, feminism or God, that in fact, the Tanakh was light years ahead in many ways in terms of understanding women vis-a-vis men and women in society. It's just that we have not been taught to read the stories properly. Okay, now by that I don't mean apologetics like, oh, in those days it was okay, so we just have to remember it's an ancient document. That's apologetics. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not saying make excuses for the text. I'm saying actually read the text and see what the text is telling us. And as we're going to see, there's a really, really important distinction that Tanakh makes. Now I will say at the outset also, is there a problem? Okay. A lot of how I approach women in Tanakh was shaped by a woman who's actually no longer alive. She died young, tragically. Her name is Tikva Freimer-Kensky. And it's very, very interesting. Tikva Freimer-Kensky was an Assyriologist by training. So she was able to, knew how to decipher and translate all the ancient languages basically that have been deciphered. Akkadian and Ugaritic and Sumerian, all the languages that you can in order to understand the ancient world. And she taught feminist studies at the University of Chicago. Okay? And she decided to write a book on women in Tanakh, utilizing the ancient literature that existed that wrote about and spoke about and told about women. And in the introduction to the book, which is really, really fascinating, she actually says when she started the book, now she taught feminist studies at the University of Chicago. She said when she started the book, she thought she was going to come to a completely different conclusion. She thought she was going to write essentially something along the lines of the Tanakh is patriarchal and there's nothing we could do about it. And what she actually discovered by comparing Tanakh to all the other extant ancient literature was something really, really fascinating. She said, and the basis of her entire book is the distinction between two very important words that I'm going to ask you. Okay. She says there is a very important distinction between the word inferior and subordinate. What's the difference? What's the difference?
Power and worth.
What?
Power and worth.
Okay, excellent, right? Power and worth, I love. I don't know who just said, I can't see faces. It's so annoying.
I'm Shira.
Am I gonna mess this up if I turn it a tiny bit?
No.
Hold on. Tammy, can I turn it? Oh, sorry. Okay. Sorry, Shira, I just want to see you. But okay, power, say again, power and what was the other thing you said?
Worth.
Worth. Okay, those are actually probably two of the best words that you could have used. Thank you so much. Okay, thanks. Power and worth, right? When someone is inferior, when you say that someone is inferior, what you're saying is their inherent worth is less than, right? Whoever we're speaking about them, they are inferior to someone else. Okay, it's always a vis-a-vis. You can only be inferior if there's someone superior to you. Okay, that's very different than subordination. What is subordination? You said the word power, Shira, right? Give me, what else does, meaning, how does that work? How does that manifest? And Shira, you can answer if you want, because it was like the two perfect words. Power, how does power manifest in sort of defining what subordination is, or in creating a sense of subordination?
Well, someone has power over you to make you do what they want you to do, rather than you having the freedom to
Correct.
do what you want.
Right? It's a hierarchy. It's an artificial hierarchy, right? And I use the word artificial not because it doesn't have practical, real ramifications. Artificial in the sense that it's invented by whoever is inventing the hierarchy. And someone, whatever the powers may be, says, I am superior to you. Excuse me, not superior and inferior, excuse me. I am, right? You are subordinate to me, right? I have, like Shira said, more power than you. But it's not speaking of, there's no reason to assume, right? Take this Iranian woman who is fighting. She's fighting because what she's saying is society deemed me subordinate, but I don't believe that I'm inferior. That's what it comes down to, okay? Now, going back to Tikva Freimer-Kensky, what was so fascinating about her sort of understanding of Tanakh is that she wasn't coming at it just from reading Tanakh. She read all, as I mentioned, all the extant literature that talks about women in the ancient world and what their roles were, and the priestesses and the harlots and all the different roles of women in the ancient world. And what she said is something really, really interesting. She said, as opposed to the ancient Near East, right, and we can't understand Tanakh without understanding the ancient Near East, in contrast to the ancient Near East, where women were inherently believed to be inherently inferior, she said Tanakh takes patriarchy as a given, right? The patriarchy was the way in which the world functioned in the ancient world, and Tanakh is not a socially revolutionary, right? Tanakh's revolution is a theological revolution, monotheism versus polytheism. Tanakh is not looking to socially revolutionize things, right? Slavery existed in Tanakh. But what she's saying is patriarchy is never condoned and it's never validated by also claiming that women are inferior. Okay, now why is that important? Why is that really, really important?
Because in a different time, when patriarchy is not the way, Tanakh is still valid because there's no inferiority.
Okay, and I'm going to give you an excellent example from slavery. Slavery was, as we mentioned, a given in the ancient world. Some people were believed to be subordinate, right? People were subordinate to other people. It's a horrible reality. Go back to the very beginning of Tanakh. And again, I'm contrasting this to other ancient Near Eastern cultures where kings are demigods and people are born, right? Or in other cultures where you could be born into a caste and that caste is, right? There's no moving between. What does Bereshit tell us about humanity? One common ancestor. B'tselem Elokim. Right? So if the Tanakh says B'tselem Elokim, again, slavery may be taken as a given, but if the morals and the ethics and the concept underlying the concept of the human race is not an inherently racist one, then it leaves room, as you're saying, for us to evolve as well. And the same goes for patriarchy. Patriarchy was taken as a given. That was the world in which the Tanakh were describing. They were describing the world in which they lived, which was a patriarchal world. So men were in charge of the army and of the priesthood, and they were the kings, and they were the ones that owned land and passed land down to their male sons. All of that was the reality in which the world was, in which the Tanakh was written. But the Tanakh never vindicates or validates that position by saying, oh, and you know why men are in control? Because women are not as smart, women are not as capable, women are not as, whatever the case may be, which she said did exist in the ancient world and you do not find in Tanakh. That distinction between subordination and inferiority is a really critical starting point for our discussion. And what we're going to have to do as we sort of thread through these stories is understand that distinction more fully and understand, assuming, right, sort of working under that assumption, now what is Tanakh saying about women and how does Tanakh use women within the stories that it's telling, okay?
Excuse me, in Shoftim, the women are actually the leaders, including the army.
Okay, so Baya's asking a very good question. Shoftim, the women are the leaders. I will say this. Shoftim is, we're going to spend a few classes on Shoftim because it's the perfect test case for this discussion. Yes, on the one hand, women are the leaders and they're the, right, you have Devorah who's leads people out to war and she's a prophet. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have Bat Yiftach, whose father sacrifices her as an olah, meaning her entire body was burnt up. You have Pilegesh Begiva. You have all sorts of other stories. So Baya, what you're asking actually sort of sharpens the question, right? Because it's saying Tanakh is not necessarily is Tanakh choosing between one extreme or the other? Which model does Tanakh prefer, the Devorahs or the Pilegesh Begivas? And it's not explicit in the text. Now, we're going to see when we get there, and as we read through the stories, it is absolutely implicit, right? And once we see how implicit it is, it's almost going to feel explicit. But the question of Shoftim is a perfect example because you have both extremes, right? And those are exactly the questions we're going to be looking at. Now, anyone who's taken my classes before is not allowed to answer this question, but I can't start a course without asking it. Define the word shot. Shot. Huh?
Simple text.
The simple. All my students are smirking because they feel so. They're so enlightened. Exactly. No. Go. Okay, simple. I'm playing devil's advocate, right? By the way, that's another warning I should give you. When I ask a question and you answer, I'm always going to argue, not because I agree or disagree, just to keep the ball rolling. Simple to you may be complicated for me and vice versa. Okay, so again, how do you define literal, right? A word can oftentimes, we always say translation is by definition an interpretation, because because no word has only one meaning or connotation. So if we're talking connotation, then where do we distinguish between, what a word connotes and what it literally means? We can't always distinguish, which is where the debate, right, arises. What else? Give me another,
Basic.
Okay, so basic I think is a variation.
It's different than simple.
Okay, how so?
Basic is giving you like sort of like a bottom line, but it doesn't necessarily mean simple.
Okay, so, but again, what is right? We could both read a pasuk and I'll say, this is the bottom line. And you'll say, no, this is the bottom line. How do we know which of us is pshat and which of us is drash?
Easiest to understand.
Maybe.
Common.
Okay, so we're getting closer now. Common meaning. Okay, excellent. So commonly understood, we're getting there, right? Commonly understood means if I say a word, okay, right? So if I use a word or a phrase and 90% of the people think it means something like this and only 10% means something like that, so maybe the commonly,
Commonly understood.
Commonly understood. So common is getting us closer. Tammy? Okay, so there you have it, right? Tammy's cheating. She's been in my class. I'm just saying. She said maybe it changes with time. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of how we have to work. Now, it's not always easy to do, and this is where archaeology and philology and understanding ancient languages and understanding the ancient culture helps us understand what pshat is, okay? If I said 50 years ago, I want an apple, what does that mean? I want an apple. If my son today says to me, Ima, I want an apple, I say no, because I know he doesn't want the apple, he doesn't want the fruit, he wants an apple product, right? Now, if I read a book from 50 years ago, and the word apple appears, okay? It is not pshat to say, oh, the author meant the apple, the author couldn't have meant the apple product because it was not even part of his purview, it didn't exist, okay? Now, again, I'm giving a really relatively simple example where a word clearly is an anachronism if you interpret it one way, but it's important because when we study Tanakh, pshat means what it meant to its original audience. What the original audience standing in front of Yirmiyahu heard and understood when he used certain phrases. And phrases are oftentimes borrowed from neighboring cultures, and phrases are borrowed from experiences with animals. We say, B'nai Yisrael, Hashem says, you're an am kshei oref. What does that mean? What does am kshei oref? What does that mean? We're stubborn. Why does a stiff neck have to do with stubborn? Because when you're riding on an animal and you're trying to turn it and its neck is stiff and it's not moving, the animal is being stubborn. So that's an idiom that made sense in the ancient world, okay? That, again, that's another example of an idiom that's easily translatable, so I'm using it. But idioms from the ancient world that were culturally contingent, in order to understand the pshat, we need to, as best as we can, understand the culture from which they derive. That's our job when we study the pshat of Tanakh. Now, I will say that in our world today, pshat is so much easier to get at than it has been for thousands of years, because we've unearthed ancient artifacts and ancient cities and texts, and we've translated those texts. So we know about the legal codes, and we know about the culture, and we know about, right, for those of you that were in my class on Mikdash last year, to try to understand the notion of Mishkan and Mikdash without understanding temples in the ancient world is not, I don't want to say futile because it'll still be meaningful, but you will not get to the pshat of what the kruvim are unless you understand what kruvim did in the ancient world and what they symbolized. Okay, so that's the first thing that we're going to try as much as possible to do is understand the pshat of the text. Okay, what did everyday life for women look like? What was patriarchy? What were the implications of patriarchy? What were women's roles in the ancient world? And how do all of these different words and idioms and phrases and associations, what did they mean to the author that was writing this specific narrative? Okay, that's the first thing. The other thing we have to do is also just be very, very aware of our own biases that we're coming into the text with. Okay, we're going to try as hard as possible to wash away all of the sort of associations culture has engendered for us, right? I'll give you this as an example because we're going to be starting to enter the story. Yeah, we have time. We're going to read the story, the beginning at least of the story of Chava today. If you close your eyes and I say picture Chava, close your eyes, what do you picture? Huh? A naked woman. You probably picture her seducing Abraham. You probably picture them eating an apple, right? A lot of what you're picturing are from legends about Lilith. A lot of what you're picturing is from Renaissance art, right? Our images of women in Tanakh has been so heavily sort of impacted by how they have been interpreted over the generations that we're going to have to work really hard to wash our minds clean and look at the text as if we've never seen it before and we've never heard of this woman before. And only then can we then begin to understand, which is going to be the second part of this course. We're going to spend really the bulk of the course looking at Tanakh and understanding how Tanakh understands women and what it says about them and how it uses women to communicate its ideas. And then only then are we going to be able to move on and look at how Midrashim incorporate women and how to close the gap between what we understand from Tanakh and what Midrash adds. And why does Midrash add that? And where are they coming from? And what's the cultural context within which Chazal were writing these Midrashim that they felt the need to almost reimagine these women, okay, that are so different, that sort of step off the pages of Tanakh itself. Okay, now I'm gonna just, what I want to do is I want to give a little bit of time to start reading the story in Breshit, the very beginning of the story in Breshit with Chava, but I just want to throw out a couple of sort of topics that we're going to be covering, so you have a sense of where we're going. The first thing we're really going to be asking is about when women appeared. The example Batya gave of, how can you say women are weak if, look, we have Devorah and Yael. What does the Tanakh do with those sort of disparate pictures? You have the really strong, heroic, brave women, and then you have the women that are victimized and oppressed. And which one does Tanakh identify with, or which one does Tanakh espouse? It's not necessarily clear. Even within Sefer Shoftim, for example, it's not entirely clear. Right? An extension of that, you have some women that are named. Right? We have Sarah and Rivka and Rachel and Leah. Go back to Sefer Shoftim. We have Devorah and Yael and Achsa. And then as the Sefer moves, we start having the daughter of Yiftach and the concubine of the man in Giva and the woman, right? There's a woman in that story in Sefer Shoftim. Avimelech, if you remember, is coming and he's about to destroy the entire town, and they're all hiding out in a tower, and he's about to light the whole tower. They're all going to be murdered. And one brave woman takes a rock and a millstone and throws it over and kills him so that he's not able to do it. Okay, so that's like a pretty important story, right? It's funny because in the other class, the Hebrew class I was teaching, there was a man in there who said, "Does it make a difference if you know the name or not?" I said, if I knew the name, maybe I could have named my daughter her name instead of having some vague memory of the lady with the millstone, right? Names are important. Names give identity, and they're what enable us to carry that identity through, and it forms our community. So where are their names? Where are they not? When are women present and when are they absent? We're going to see that stories about women being active and are sort of clustered together. So is that a manifestation of just the author of that specific book, or is that a manifestation of time and of approaches to women evolving even over the biblical period? And what changes, right? Is the life of, for example, the period of Shoftim for women different than once power is centralized in the monarchy and people are urbanized more?
Later. I'm in the middle of a class.
It's like the never ending. Someone's going to do like a Saturday Night Live skit on teaching on Tuesday. Where I'm also going to ask you to think out of the box a little. Okay, so for example, the word queen, there was no such thing as a queen in Tanakh or in the ancient world. Okay, in Egypt they had, right, the queen of Malkat Sheva, but that's it. There was no such thing as a queen in the ancient world. So do we conclude from there that women never had any say in what took place in the palace? Right, now think about it. There's no word for Malkat, but what woman does seem to play a really important role?
Isabel.
Well, Isabel is an example, right? And she's one sort of Yotzeit min haklal, but the Aim HaMelech, right? Batsheva is the end of her life, right? So we have to also think beyond just titles and see where there are ways that women within a patriarchal world were able to sort of circumvent the hierarchy and utilize strength in a way that sort of circumvented the powers that be, so to speak. We're also going to ask about themes that overlap. So here's another one my students are not allowed to answer. I'm going to start a story and you finish it. There's a man and he's chosen by God, and he's told that he's going to have a very important son who's also chosen for a certain task. Everyone's been tasked. Tell me off the bat what you know about his wife. You know something about her, you just don't realize you know it.
No name? No name?
No, she had a name. Sarah has a name. Rivka has a name. Rachel has a name.
I was thinking of
She
Shimshon's
was
mother.
smarter than he was.
Shimshon's mother is just known as wife of.
Right, Shimshon is Mrs. Eshet Manoach.
She was smarter than he was.
Smarter, well, that's subjective, but I might agree.
More intuitive. She understood what Hashem was telling her better than he did.
Okay, so we're going to see oftentimes that is the case, and there's something important in those stories. For example, the mother of Shimshon is a perfect example. But there's something that the text tells us, that we're not relying on interpretation. You know that there's a woman married to a man who's been chosen, and his son has been chosen, or his future son will be important.
That's Sarah.
What do you know about
Abraham and Sarah.
Baron? All these women married to the chosen man, and the man is promised he's going to have a chosen son. Now, at the end of the day, they all give birth, so they're not actually barren permanently. They are for a specific amount of time. We're not going to ask in this class questions like, why was she barren? Because we don't know, and there's no point. The questions we always go back to in this class is, why, if I know nothing else about these women, I don't know what Sarah looked like, I don't know what her hobbies were, I have no idea if she missed her family back in Ur, I know nothing about them. Why does the Tanakh tell me that for a given amount of time, she was back? Look at Leah, right? Leah has all these sons. There was a couple of years window in between, and this Tanakh makes very clear that Hashem Sagarat Rahma. Why? Right? Why is that theme of barrenness important? And as we're going to see, again, I'm touching on one uniquely female theme, but we're going to see there are oftentimes uniquely female themes. Women, I'll give you another good one. If anyone's child is starting to date, if you're in Tanakh, where do you tell your kid to go if they want to find a, Go to the well. Why is everyone always meeting at the wells, right? Now, again, we know why they met at wells, because the well was the entrance into the city. The well was where people would gather, likely the younger people, because the water was heavy, and that was one of the tasks that they had been responsible for. But we're not asking that. We're asking, why does the Tanakh include this story? What does the Tanakh want me to know about the difference between Rivka meeting at the well and Moshe meeting Tzipporah at the well? And the Tanakh is begging us to compare and contrast the stories by incorporating motifs that seem to repeat and that are uniquely linked to women and perhaps even women and their relationships with men. So those are the questions that we're going to be asking. I will say one other thing, just to sort of make sure you come back next class. I'll give you two legal cases, and I'm going to ask you to make sense of this for me. A man suspects his wife of being disloyal and cheating on him. What does she do? And this is important because this is not a narrative where I could say, oh, we misunderstood. Hashem says, Moshe, tell Bnei Israel, here's the law. What's the law? So what is the Misha Sota? What does that mean? A man suspects. Now, we're not ruling out the possibility that the man is paranoid, right? Tanakh doesn't take into account paranoia. A man suspects his wife. What do?
Goes to
Her to this male-dominated place, right? There's no women when she gets there saying, shh, it's okay, you're going to be okay, don't worry. She walks in, there's a male priest and a male high priest into this man, and what do? They mortify
take her hair covering off.
They take her hair off and they mess up her hair and they make her drink this water. Now, that's a really hard halakha to read through. Okay? We're going to take a step back and read that halakha in context, and we're going to see, and I promise you this is not apologetics, we're going to see that it's actually a brilliant way of protecting women within the context of the way women were held on trial in the ancient world. Okay, but we can only appreciate that when we understand what happened to disloyal women in the world in which the Bible was written. Okay, I'll give you one other example. A man marries a young woman, and he wakes up the next morning and says, not right, I paid full price and she wasn't a virgin. What do? And there's no equivalent for men, right? Because there's no symbol of virginity. So what do?
Did they have to be?
Huh? Nor was it expected. Okay, you can argue that. Fine, right, right. Virginity is not a virtue, a male virtue. We can argue. Which, and by the way, we're going to talk about that also.
Yeah.
Why is chastity? We're going to see why is chastity a value within this world? Why is that something we're going to see? It's not just like this hang up. It was part of a much broader socialization. But a girl is found. The man claims she wasn't a virgin. So what happens next? Again, Hashem said to Moshe, if a man wakes up the next morning and goes out and says, this woman I paid full price for is not a virgin, her parents can either bring the sheet and show that there's blood. Now, we all know physiologically that many women that are virgins don't actually have blood. And so that's not, right, a perfect scientific. Okay, so the parents can bring the sheet. What happens if the parents can't find the sheet? Or what if there was no blood on the sheet? Anyone know what happens next? She's killed.
She goes back to her father.
Only if he can, no, she doesn't go back to her father, she's killed. Okay, so we are gonna have to talk about how we stomach halachot like this. Now, again, without apologetics, we're gonna see that in fact, these laws are much more a part of the social fabric of the ancient Mediterranean honor code, honor shame code that existed, and that there were male counterparts to these laws that we don't even think to read alongside each other until we begin to understand what honor and shame in the ancient world is all about, because we're so far removed from the notions of honor and shame. Okay? Once we begin to understand the code, we'll begin to understand how the laws worked into that code and how in reality, as we're going to see, women are actually much more protected than meets the eye. Okay, but we have to be a little bit reviled first in order to actually want to read the cases themselves. Okay, so what we're going to do first, just for today, sorry. I want to start reading, because if we're going to start talking about women, then we have to start with the very first woman, right? That only makes sense. Does everyone have Tanakhs today? Okay. From now on, bring a Tanakh every day. Yeah, I'm going to pass it. We have on our asses. Apples are good for something beyond just examples. Okay.
Yael,
Yeah.
can I just ask a question? It's
Yeah, of course.
Shoshana.
Oh, hi.
So if we're going to be analyzing the women through Tanakh and we're going to be using midrashim that are written by Chazal, when did the switch happen where Chazal looked at women as inferior? Because
We're going to get to it. I don't say,
there's that shift.
So I'm not saying Chazal see women as inferior. I'm saying that there's
But they do. I mean, like in the Gemara, they're very, there's things that they say that are
So we're going to talk about it, and we're going to see
their
that
nature.
were also a product of the world in which they were living. So we have to understand what was going on in the broader culture. Again, the reason I'm starting with Tanakh is because Tanakh is divine, right? So we have to first understand what Tanakh says in order to appreciate, in contrast, or not necessarily in contrast, what Chazal are building on, right? And if they veer off, why they veer off. We're going to get to that, I promise, not to worry. Okay, so we're going to start here with the very first story. Now, what I want to do, we're not answering any questions today. What I want you to do is erase every picture of naked seductress Eve giving the apple to poor innocent, unsuspecting Adam. Get that out of your head. What I want to do today is we really don't have a lot of time. Just look very quickly, try to get a sense of the story. We're going to revisit it next week, but I want the juices to sort of start flowing, and I want you to start asking the right questions, okay? Now, Perek Aleph and Bet in Breshit are sort of two different accounts in Breshit, and we could spend an entire course comparing them and discussing why we have two accounts. I don't want to get bogged down in that. What I do want to do is, and we're going to see this in the next class, we do have to read each story individually and then synthesize them, okay? Because they both appear. And so they're clearly giving us two different perspectives. The question is, or not the question, but in order to appreciate each perspective and the sort of, the cumulative effect of them, we have to first understand the first story and then move on to the next, and then we're going to compare them. So we really don't have a lot of time. So I promise you, whatever we skip over this week, we'll get back to next class. I just want to start to get you thinking, okay? So we're going to start with Pasuk Chaf Vav in Perek Aleph. I'm skipping over the beginning of Breshit, even though we're going to see the order of how things were created, it goes without saying, are important. We're going to get back to that. But let's start with the very first, what Hashem says initially. Vayomer Elokim, Naaseh Adam b'tzalmeinu kidmutenu. So when we do a course in monotheism, we'll ask who God was talking to here. But for now, we're just going to take it. V'yirdu b'dgat hayam, uve'of hashamayim, u'va'behema, uve'chol ha'aretz, uve'chol ha'remes ha'romeis al ha'aretz. Right? So God says to whoever this divine audience is, let us create man in our image. Vayivra Elokim, and it talks about what this man is going to do, that he's going to be sort of at the top of the hierarchy of all the other living things that have been created until now. Vayivra Elokim et Adam bitzalmo, b'tselem Elokim bara oto. So God creates ha-Adam in his image. Zacharu nekeva bara otam. Male and female he created. What does that mean? And then Hashem says, "Vayivarech otam Elokim," and then He gives them the charge: "Pru urvu u'mil'u et haaretz v'kivshuha." All the things humanity is going to need to do: fill the earth, proliferate, master the earth. It doesn't mean control land; it means to master it. Science, technology, right? Be able to really utilize the earth to our benefit. And then it talks about all the different things that He's going to have to do, and it makes very clear again that man dominates all the other created living beings. Okay, because he was created b'tselem Elokim, and then Hashem looks at everything that He created so far, and tov me'od. Okay, I'm skipping over a lot. I really, really encourage for the next class, just read through the chapter again, as if you've never heard it before, and any questions that arise, jot them down, because we're going to have to begin to address them. I'm going to Perek Bet. Okay, Pasuk Daled starts the next creation account. We have creation 1 and creation 2. Here's the second. Okay. And now it goes on and it says, he's talking about the earth as sort of this unfulfilled potential. All the potential was there, but nothing was growing yet. Why? 2 reasons. There was no rain, and man had not yet worked the land. Okay. The Adel, and then it goes through and it lists all these different rivers that were spread. We're going to ignore the geographical details for 1 second. Go to Pasuk Tedvav, verse 15. Vayikach Hashem Elokim et ha'adam. God takes this human. Now, again, whether I'm translating it as human or man, you're going to have to tell me next week, right? I'm saying human because in the beginning it was ha'adam zachar nekeva bara utam. But as we're going to see in the second account, Adam becomes synonymous with Adam, right? Adam. So which one is it? Which one is the Tanakh referring to in this case? Hashem takes Adam, vayanicheyu began Eden le'avdao l'shamra. He takes man from where he was frolicking, doing his thing, and he puts him into this garden in Eden, right? One of the biggest misconceptions we have is that Adam was created in Gan Eden. He wasn't. Adam was created and then put into this special garden. What's this garden? Hashem vayitzav Hashem Elokim et Adam, vayitzav Hashem Elokim al ha'adam le'mor. Mikol etzagan achol tochel. He puts man in the garden and he says one thing to him. He says, look around, see all these trees. Now, by the way, interestingly, the trees are growing even though everything else is not yet, right? So this is some kind of like, I don't know, experiment, some sort of bubble, okay? Biosphere. Exactly, a biosphere. And he puts him in there and he says, Mikol eitzagan nachol tochel, eat whatever you want, look around, all this is for you. Ume'etzadat tovara lo tochal mimenu. But there's this one tree you can't eat from, the tree of Eitz Tovara, Eitzadat. And why? You're going to die the day you eat it. Okay, now by the way, did they die the day they ate it? No. Vayomer Hashem Elokim lo tov hayot Adam levado, eselo ezer kinegdo. Now Hashem looks and he says, you know what? It's not good for man to be all by himself. Let me make him an ezer kinegdo. Now raise your hand if you find that phrase offensive. Let me make him a loosely translated helpmate. Yeah, that's offensive. Vayitzer Hashem Elokim min ha'adama kol chayat hasadevet kol ovishmaim. And again, I'm skipping just in the interest of time. We'll read it again more carefully next week. Hashem brings before Adam all of the things he had created thus far. And he's like, Adam, what do you think about the lions? Adam, maybe the fish. And of course, nothing is fitting. So what does Hashem do? V'lo matzah ezer kinegdo. He didn't find a proper ezer kinegdo. Vayapel Hashem Elokim tardema al ha'adam. So he puts man into this deep sleep. Vayishan. Vayikach echat mitzalotav vayiskor basar tachtena. He takes from his rib and then he closes him up. Vayiven Hashem Elokim et hatzela asher lakach min ha'adam leisha vayivieha el ha'adam. He builds from Adam's rib a woman. So we're taken from Vayomer Adam. Now this is very different, even just chronologically. How is this different than Parak Aleph? Parak Aleph were created simultaneously, right? Hashem takes Ha'adam, B'Tselem Elokim bara utam, right? Well, here it seems like there's a chronological gap. So again, we're not saying which is right. That's not the question we ever ask. We're saying, what is this second story telling us? How is it, why is it different than the first? Or why is the first different than the second? How do we read the two in tandem? Right? What is the second one communicating to us? Vayomer ha'adam, and now listen to what Adam says. By the way, the same Adam that had named all the other animals. Zotapam etzem me'atzamai uvasar mibsari lizot likare isha kime ishu kachazot. Finally, right? Basically, he's saying, finally, I found the perfect fitting match for me. And then it goes on and it makes sort of, this is a sort of ideological comment that's why from now on, man leaves his home and marries his wife. And that's how family life perpetuates itself. Okay. And then we have this other really weird episode. In Gan Eden, we're told, Vayushnehem arumim, ha'adam ve'ishto, v'lo yitbo shasho. Right. So again, I asked before, why do I know that Sarah is barren? I have no idea what color hair she had. I know nothing about Adam and Chava, the paradigmatic human beings. I know one thing about them. What is it? They were naked and they weren't embarrassed about it. Why is that relevant? Right? Who cares? Okay. What color eyes did Adam have? The anachash haya arum mikol chayat hasadeh asher asa Hashem Elokim vayomer el ha'isha. Now the snake comes up to the woman and he says, right? Remember God said, don't eat from any of the trees. Did he get that right? No. How did he get that wrong already? One tree.
Only
And she says, no, you got that wrong. He said we can eat from the other trees, we just can't eat. What did the Nachash do here? He invited her into dialogue, into back and forth. This is the first time we see people communicating, the first time we see two people, one has one idea, another has another, and they're sort of hashing it out. Until now, people were talking about people. Adam names the woman, he refers to her, Hashem speak. Here we have the first case of dialogue. Okay, why is that important? Well, she's talking to a snake. That's going to be very important. We just said that. Okay, so we're going to see. Now the Nachash says, "Lo motimutun, you're not going to die. Ki yodea Elokim, ki biyom achalchem mimenu, v'nifkechu einechem v'yitem kelohim yodei tov v'ra." So you're not going to die. It's just that God knows that if you eat from the tree, you'll be just like Him. Now, is the Nachash lying? Go to the end, go to the very beginning of Perek Gimel for a second. Oh, sorry, not the very beginning, the end. Perek Gimel, Pasuk Chafet. This is after Hashem kicks them out. And look at what it says. Vayomer Hashem Elokim. Now God is saying this. Hein ha'adam haya ka'achad mimenu. Now man is just like us. Still talking to whoever Hashem is talking to up there. Ladat tovara. Now he ate from the tree. He's just like us. We can't have that. So what does Hashem do? Kicks him out and locks the entryway. So the snake seems like he's being manipulative, but he's actually just a precursor to what Hashem himself says half a parak later. Okay. Now the Nachash, what happens once they have this conversation, and we're totally running out of time. I have 3 minutes. I'm going to leave you on a cliffhanger. I do that on purpose, really. Pasuk Vav, Vatera ha'isha, ki tova eitz lama'achal. She looks at it. She's taking it all in. This is also the first time we're seeing anyone reflect on anything, right? We're seeing her think and reflect. Vatikach mi pirio vatochal, vatitein leisha ima vayochal. She takes from it, like, this is really good. Here, take a bite. And by the way, there's no, I don't know if you noticed, there's no like seduction scene in that little pasuk. Their eyes are opened. And now they realize they're naked. Again, why is that relevant? And they quickly make their coverings out of the alei te'ena. What does that mean? What's the word mitalech, by the way? So if it's, and they heard Hashem walking, it would be vayishmu et kol Hashem holech. Mitalech is what? Ongoing. Hashem had walking, whatever the word walking, right? Personification. Hashem had been there the whole time. Suddenly they hear him. Okay? They hide. Suddenly they're aware of God's presence and they quickly hide. Now, why are they hiding? Now, no man in history has ever incriminated himself the way Adam is about to. Hashem says, why are you hiding? And Adam says, I heard your voice. And I was so embarrassed because I'm naked, so I hid. And Hashem says, who told you you're naked? Implying what? You're not supposed to know that about yourself. Did you eat from it? Now, classic humans. No, she gave it to me. And then Hashem turns to the woman and he says, did you? No, the Nachash. And what follows are, and we're going to pick up with this in the next class, all the curses. Okay, the most offensive of which you might find is when Hashem says to the woman, right? It's going to be really hard childbirth is going to be painful. And then Hashem says to her, and this is going to be a pasuk.
Are you free?
Huh? One sec, I'll answer the question in a second. Hashem says to Chava, and this is a pasuk we are gonna have to work very hard to understand. The Eli sheikh teshukatech, right? Your design, I'm loosely translating, and this is not gonna be our final translation. Your desire will be unto your husband, who remembers the end of the pasuk? Vihu yimsholbach, and he shall rule over you. Okay, so if this is the first time we encounter male and female, we have a lot of work to do, because this is really gonna, obviously goes without saying, set the tone for everything. I will say at the outset, I don't have every perfect answer to all of these questions, but I think we're gonna do a lot of work in trying to make sense of what's going on and try to understand things and understand it in context. And we will begin with that, not next week, because I just remembered it. Good luck with that. It's really gonna do much. It's really gonna do a lot. No. So good luck. Wow. I know, this is terrible. It's like when the kids go back to school and the next day it's Rosh Hashanah. Right. All right, but we will get there, and we will, and if you have time, read these stories on your own. Let them flush them out.
Yael, I wanted to tell you that my sister
And why?
is not looking.
Oh, yeah.
What about? Yes. Oh, no, I forgot my. So we will get there. We will get there. More often than people would like to admit. Yes. I know, but it's so much
Yael, it was wonderful. I guess this is how we'll have to meet.
such a fun topic. The Chava is the hardest. It's not a perfect.